Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading from the One Year Bible. My name's Stephen Mizell, and Jay Rivenbark and I are joined by Wendy Korbusieski this week. And today we begin a journey in the book of Revelation. We're in Revelation chapter 2, verses 1 through 17, and we're looking at three of the churches that Jesus speaks to, the three in Asia Minor. And we're going to talk about a few things. One, which one of these messages feels most relevant to today? We're going to talk about how we balance truth and love in a healthy church. So I hope you grab your Bible and a pen and paper, and let's have a conversation around the Word of God. Hey everybody, today we're over in Revelation, actually probably for the next few days, looking at Christ's letters to the church, or to the churches, the seven churches. And today we're in Revelation 2, verses 1 through 17. And Jesus is addressing in these verses the three churches in Asia Minor, Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum. And he's diagnosing some spiritual conditions that are still present today in the church: loveless, orthodoxy, fateful suffering, dangerous compromise, all of those. And so when you read this, was there a piece of it that you said, I want to make sure we don't skip over this? Maybe it didn't provide a question or something that you wanted to say, hey, I want to make sure we talk about this.
Not in particular, but just overarching, not necessarily something that was said, but how he addresses the churches. I think just the behavior or the language he uses, I think it's just a good lesson for us. I love the way he praises and encourages before he comes in with the correction or the rebuke. And I think that's just a valuable lesson for us that, you need to pattern your behavior after that. It's always good to lead with encouragement before you come in with the correction. Just a good lesson.
I would agree. So when I start out, your hair looks nice, your shoes
exactly.
Yeah. But don't you hate the situations though when you're having to make stuff up?
Yeah.
Like well, I don't mean that necessarily, but the situation is so horrific.
Yeah.
That but you are saying it sounds like this. Your hair looks nice. You got pretty eyes. But you've been doing drugs, right? No. Those are the situations I hate. When I can genuinely offer positive reinforcement,
yes,
and it feels natural, but to force myself to do it, I'm not good.
Well, I think there are some times that the situation is such you can bypass the compliments and just get to the problem. But generally speaking, it is a good approach.
It is.
Yeah. But one of the things for me reading through all the quote letters to the churches is how detailed he is. I think we tend to think of Jesus knows us, he knows what's going on in our life, but he has specific details about the church as a whole, how they operate, how they feel, how they think, how they respond, things are doing well and getting right, the things that they're struggling with. And it just points out the fact, that I think of that as it relates to this specific church or to the campus church, that he knows every specific detail about what's going on.
For me, I was struck specifically, and this may be part of the answer to question number one that I'm going to ask. But the thing that struck me the most is because as we record this, we're in the middle of a sermon series on the book of Ephesians, where we'll spend 9 weeks talking about the book of the church at Ephesus. And I don't like to characterize things necessarily like this, but from my perspective, it has been one of the most impactful sermon series that I have preached. That it feels that way. And I think he wrote the letter in the context of a church that was doing some amazing things. Mm-hmm. But here Jesus is saying it's trailed off. you know, and it reminded me that you can be a church on fire and not. Both, it can be the same church, not at the same time,
Right.
but it can be the same church. And that was the thing that probably was just stuck out to me, because Ephesus is so in my skin right this minute. And so the question that I would ask is, which of these churches feels most relevant today?
Yeah, I kind of ping pong back and forth between the church at Ephesus and the church at Pergamum. For one, the reason there for Ephesus is it was this church on fire, and then the flame has kind of diminished, and you can't help but wonder, have they become? Is it because of a sense of self-righteousness, or is it because of the sense of just inward? They've turned inward, and like they've become just inward looking instead of outward focused.
Right.
Which is it? And if whatever the case, that is kind of a message for the church today. Are we becoming too self-righteous? Are we too inwardly focused and not avoiding what it is we're supposed to be doing? And that is searching for the lost and bringing them, going out and bringing people in.
Yeah.
Or the church at Pergamum, where there's just terrible moral compromise situation going on. And where are we letting the world creep in? So there's an instance of both of those, I think, going on that we just need to caution ourselves against.
I would agree. I think you could see and identify with the elements in all three of these. The painful part is you don't want to be able to see the things that he points out that need to be corrected. But I particularly highlighted in the church at Thyatira, he said, I can see your constant improvement in all these things which he just listed: your love, your faith, your service, your patient endurance. And I like to think that we're a church that is practicing those things and that we're constantly improving, getting better in those areas, that we're constantly aware of that. And later on, that same church, he says, hold tightly to what you have until I come, meaning don't give up, don't let up, don't turn back, stay faithful. The first church there to Ephesus, the danger, I think, is always to cool off, to, depending on translation you read, leave your first love, left your first love, is to, I think, even when the church is doing, quote, really, really good things, it's easy to get the focus off of Jesus and onto the, quote, success of things, to the point that it affects the relationship. And so I just think that's something that we have to constantly be on guard for.
It does not say that they had abandoned their orthodoxy. He doesn't say your activities are wrong. He says your affection is wrong. And there is danger in things becoming rote, right? That you continue to do them, but they have no meaning, because they become empty. The other side of that is that you become full of activity, but there's no affection. So I grew up on the opposite side of orthodoxy, is how I would describe it. The routine that often does feel empty. It's not completely, but it can feel empty because it is just so this same thing over and over again. Was pushed against, and they would at times talk about how dry and dead it was. But the opposite of that is also true, where there's a flurry of activity, and it may always be different, right? You may have some new activity going on all the time. And what I mean by that is, you're singing all the newest songs instead of all of the old hymns. You've got the newest programs instead of, doing the same old thing. But those things without affection are just as empty as things that are rote and repeated over and over again. And as I've gotten older, the challenge to blend the two is tough. I think that there have to be some routines to keep stability and affection. That's true in marriage. There have to be some, you kiss your wife bye, you kiss your wife good night. There should be like some basic things and that's simple, but like there should be some routine things that you should do. And then there should be some activities that are different. They're not normal. But, I think that the routine keeps their assurance in the relationship. The activity keeps the fun in the relationship.
Excitement.
You have to have them both. One is not to the other. But the other side of that is you can have routine and activity in a marriage and still have no affection.
Yeah.
And I think that's the danger in the church. The book of Ephesus, and I think it's just because I'm preaching it right now. I was praying, like I could take you could, if you go to my office, I have not turned the page. The morning I was preaching, we were preaching from 2 Timothy 3 or 1 Timothy 3. I don't remember. My brain's dead now. About the end, the last days. And I opened it to Ephesians, and I was reading that morning as I was praying before I came out to preach. And I've just been wrapped up kind of in Ephesians. And it is disheartening to when you think, and it should also be a warning to us that no matter how much fire or fury or revival that you are experiencing right now, it does not stay there without some intent.
Yep.
And there will be days that, marriage is, there's some days it's easy.
Mm-hmm.
There are some days it's not easy. And you have to be determined on the days that it's not easy to do the same things that you do on the days that it's easy. Because if you don't, it'll fail. And I think that it's easy to have a flurry of activity and a flurry of fire or a flurry of revival and think, okay, man, we're on it. And you keep repeating those same behaviors over and over again. And it's not the behaviors, it's not the activity necessarily that draws the presence of Christ. It is that heart. Your heart's got to be right about it. He talks in Ephesians chapter 4. So Wendy, you talked about the church at Pergamum, how they were struggling with a healthy church. How do love and truth balance in a healthy church?
I think just the same in all situations. Truth without the love is alienating and brutal. I think you talked about that a couple days ago in those situations where it can become contentious, and then it does no good. But love without the truth, on the other hand, it can't be generic. It can't be artificial. It has to be built out of relationship. So the two, to be effective, have to go kind of hand in glove, and it requires a church that's built on genuine discipleship, on genuine relationships. And I think if anything that could have benefited this church was a church that was dedicated to true relationships with one another that people were willing to walk and live in the lives of one another to call out what needed to be called out. And you can only do that when you're in relationship with people, that you can speak into their lives and say, I mean, that's not cool. That's not right. This needs correction. But you can do that because it's delivered with love. They have to go together.
To be effective,
Mm-hmm.
they do. I'm thinking of some churches / even denominations that I think had or have good intentions under the banner of love, but have forsaken truth
Mm-hmm.
for the sake of it, and have run amok and
Yes.
gone off the rails. And so one without the other is going to create significant issues. And it requires both. And if you have genuine love, I think it positions you relationally to be able to share, teach truth, as difficult, as challenging as that truth may be. And so one without the other is ineffective long term.
Compromise is slow corruption. Rarely does a church wake up and have gone from here to here in a day.
Yep.
It's the slow corruption. And usually it's the absence of one or the other, because I think corruption can be the absence of love or the absence of truth.
Yeah, I agree.
The way I wrote it in my notes is love without truth deceives people, and truth without love destroys people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that both are corrosive. I have spent more time, well, let me say it like this. I don't think I've ever been in a church that was on the love without truth side. But I have been in some arenas that were truth without love side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They greeted you at the door with a billy club and started hitting you on the steps, and they continued to beat you on the way out, And I think that shows up a lot in my own nature. I'm much more heavy-handed than I am soft. I didn't have the overcorrective. Like there are even people on our staff who had that same experience that I did, but their response was to overcorrect, or that's how I would describe it. They went to the other side, and they're more likely to have love without truth, to err on that side. I never had, that was never my experience. I think it was so ingrained in me. It still comes out of me sometimes, even when I'm preaching or talking to people. It's just like, you just let me hit you. You'll be better if I pound on you for a minute. But they both have to go together.
Yes.
And, I think the beginning of it is, I think moral drift begins with doctrinal neglect. When we ignore the basic tenets of the faith, right? There are some things that some churches practice on both ends of the spectrum that are clearly like, I don't think I'm exaggerating. You grew up in a very similar environment where you got beat with a club on the way in the door and on the way out, That should be clear from anybody on the outside that this is a bad way to deal with things. And it's clear on the outside. You mentioned some denominations that have come off the rails. It's clear to everybody on the outside, y'all have lost your way. Yeah. There's a reason why you've gone from this many million to a couple 100,000, that there are reasons that is true. And it's not because you're the remnant either. Right. But it's easy to see from the outside, but the path that took them there was not so easy to see. But it's somewhere along the way, there was doctrinal neglect that said a basic tenet of the faith, we're going to compromise at this point, and we're going to focus on this one area more than another area. And, I think to have truth and love together, because Jesus is different than us. That's the qualities of Jesus, because we can't understand this. Jesus was full of grace and full of truth at the same time, right? It wasn't, he was half grace and half truth.
Yeah.
He was full of grace and full of truth. We're usually full of malarkey. You know what I'm saying? We can't comprehend that, because we have compartmentalized grace. We have compartmentalized truth. We have some truth and some grace. We're not all of both. And I think we have to be intentional and understand that there's a constant tension present. If you're going to have grace and truth, there's a constant tension. There's a pressure on us to operate in that. And sometimes that means we offend people. And other times it means we're offering grace where it looks like it's compromise. And it's not that easy to define.
That's correct.
I've even had to preface conversations to say, look, I'm getting ready to tell you something, and it may sound harsh, but understand I'm delivering this to you because I love you, and I want you to receive it in love. And then I come in with the message, because I know what I'm getting ready to say. It's a hard truth.
Yeah.
But I want it to be received with love and grace. So, but I know the flesh in me, I don't know how else other to deliver that in the moment. I know the truth has to be delivered. So that's the only way I know how to get it out. And what supersedes at the moment is the truth had to be delivered.
Yeah, well, as a parent, you're delivering harsh truth occasionally, but it's in grace that you're doing it. Out of love that you're doing it. It's not. It's not that you're trying to hurt them. That's the difference. You know, what is the motive behind this truth that I'm giving them? Thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. I just want to remind you that Jesus walks among his churches. He inspects our hearts more than he inspects our habits. And we should return to our first love, because it's never too late for renewal. I hope you'll practice that today as you go through your day. And I hope you'll join us again on the next edition of One Single Story.